Okay, good morning. So today we are on lesson 46 of Workbook of A Course in Miracles. God is the love in which I forgive. It's an interesting line in the fourth paragraph down. It says, if you are doing the exercise as well, you should have no difficulty in finding a number of people you have not forgiven. So remember that, and you go when the ego kicks in, because this is the only way to remember God, and the remembrance of God is the death knell for the ego. So if you're doing this lesson and the ego attempts to um, help you judge yourself in regard to your progress with the lesson, remember what the lesson actually says. If you're doing this exercise well, you should have no problem coming up with people who you need to forgive. And actually, it's all self-forgiveness. Um, it's a safe rule. It's a safe rule that anyone you do not like is a suitable subject. Mention each one by name and say, God is the love in which I forgive you. And all that is just preparation for the fact that all forgiveness is self-forgiveness, because all condemnation is self-condemnation. And a judgmental mind gets the result of its own thinking, which is the experience of judgment. And because of the nature of how the illusion of space and time was manufactured, um, it's manufactured based on what we'd want to get rid of in ourselves, and so we project out as if it is not ours. So we project out our lack of forgiveness of ourselves onto a world that we think has harmed us and need to be forgiven. And in a particular sense, the world is the only harm the world has done is to keep you from realizing that God is the love in which I forgive, because God is love, period. Um, I had an interesting event years back in 1986, when I initially had um, my first experience of direct contact with God. Um, what I realized was that when I was 6 years old, in Our Lady of Pompeii Grammar School, and we began to work with this book that called the Baltimore Catechism. The first two questions in the book, first question is who is God? What is God? And the answer was very simple: God is love. And the second question was, who am I? And the answer was, God created me to show forth his goodness. And after that, all the other questions and all the other answers were ways in which they adjudicated and tried to reconcile the fact that sin exists, and how did that occur. The simplicity of God being love is the simplicity of the reason why fear does not exist, um, except in an illusion of something other than God and his kingdom. Um, so God is the love in which I forgive. And make no mistake about it, God is love, and therefore so am I, so are you. And in reality, there is only love. One of the things that we were talking about yesterday was a way in which I was shown to look at the entire illusion of space and time, and consciousness for that matter. Consciousness, which is the domain of the ego. Um, the ego is the questioning part of post-schism psyche of man. Consciousness as the domain of that ego. To look at it as if it was a balloon, and balloon being the membrane of separation in which we think we exist as something separate and apart from everything, including ourselves. And that balloon, that membrane of separation, um, which we experience as our bodies in space and time, how we experience that membrane of separation is basically every sensation, everything that occurs, every feeling that we have is love trying to re-enter our experience of ourself, re-enter our minds and hearts by impinging upon that balloon, that membrane of separation that tries to keep us separate and unaware of the fact that the kingdom, which is all there is and which is what you are, is only love. So the love above, which we discuss as God, and the love below, which we come to know as our true self, the love is trying to break through that membrane of separation. And the membrane itself, which is the domain of the ego, whenever it's impinged upon by love, it causes us to question what's going on, because in a sense we experience it as discomfort. There's a section in the course where what's spoken about is the idea that the Holy Spirit induces discomfort in order to help us recognize we need a correction. And if we look at the idea of this membrane of separation as being this balloon, or another way it was shown to look at it was an inverse mirror ball. It's an inverse mirror ball in which this tiny fragment of light has been bouncing around and bouncing off the mirror and establishing these patterns that we look at and we give meaning to. We select out patterns that we think make sense to us, give meaning to them, and really all we're seeing is traces of light past attempting to escape from the inverse mirror ball, in which it's trying to discover who it is based on looking at the past traces of light and giving meaning to the patterns and thinking that those patterns have some significance, apart from the recognition that the patterns are composed of light and it's all light eventually. But let's get back to the lesson for a second. So you have love, the love of God, which Jesus talks about as, a revelatory experience. God only gives. And a revelatory experience God only gives is not reciprocal. You don't give love back to God. You experience God's love in a direct communication. The love of God is trying to impinge on the upper surface of that membrane of separation, and the love which you are and have forgotten about is trying to impinge on the lower surface of that membrane of separation so that they can be reunited once again and establish you as the kingdom of heaven itself, so that the sensations that occur in that membrane is just the discomfort being introduced by that Holy Spirit, the whole spirit of love, in attempt to get your attention not on how you've identified that impingement as pain and suffering, but as a way of looking past the meanings that we have given to everything in order to discover and allow the love that is deep, deep down within us and hidden to reunite with the love of God, which is way, way high above us and is trying to reconnect in you so you can come to know of who you are. That's why yesterday it was said that we need to sink down. And in the sinking down, we don't know how high we're actually attempting to reach. So God is the love in which I forgive. God does not forgive because he is never condemned. And there must be condemnation. There must be condemnation before forgiveness is necessary. Forgiveness is the great need of this world, but that is because it's a world of illusions. Those who forgive are thus releasing themselves from illusions, while those who withhold forgiveness are binding themselves to them. You must get the result of your own thinking, and by looking and experiencing the results that you're getting, you come to learn what you are thinking. Does that make sense? Here, we're very confused as to what we're really thinking. Well, if we look at the results, in our experience of the results, we can recognize the truth of what we've been thinking, whether we have been forgiving or whether we have been withholding forgiveness and binding ourselves to the illusion. As you condemn only yourself, so do you forgive only yourself. There's a line in A Course in Miracles which, for some reason, has a tendency to, how should I say it, be a turnoff for those, perhaps, who think that there are other paths to God, and the ego utilizes what the Course says against your own need and the world's need for forgiveness. So Jesus makes a statement. He says the only way to God is through forgiveness. Now, people say, well, what about those who don't know the Course? What about those who don't get blah, 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 blah? What he's saying is this, quite simply, and it's echoed in this lesson. Anyone who has had an experience of God has indeed forgiven. They may not have known how it happened, why they forgave themselves. They may not understand it at all, but forgiveness as an action of mind came upon them, maybe through abject surrender as it did with me, and allowed them, in a moment of total abject surrender, to enter into communication and experience with God, simply because they could not stand their own thinking and no longer wanted the results of it. So, when I had my encounter with God, I had no idea what forgiveness was. I thought forgiveness was because I was guilty, rather than because God is the love in which I forgive. Forgiveness is given to us not because we're guilty, but because we're perfect, whole, innocent, and are likewise only love. And if we can learn to begin to dissociate the action of mind from thinking forgiveness is because we're guilty, guilt is not the cause of forgiveness. God's love is the cause of forgiveness. Although God does not forgive, his love is nevertheless the basis of forgiveness. Guilt and fear is not the basis of forgiveness. It's God's love that is the basis of forgiveness. And as typical of all the thinking of all the human beings in the world, we always get it backwards. And part of the function of the lessons is to free our mind from the false associations that we've made in them, so that we can be upset, set up, righted in our thinking, and therefore begin to experience ourselves, our brothers, and the world rightly. I am never upset for the reason that I think. I am being upset rather than turned down and inward. Although God does not forgive, his love is nevertheless the basis of forgiveness. Fear condemns, love forgives. Forgiveness thus undoes what fear has produced, returning the mind to the awareness of God. For this reason, forgiveness can truly be called salvation. It is the means by which illusions disappear. So for anyone who for a single instant experienced the disappearance of a particular illusion or the entirety of illusion. What Jesus is telling us is that they achieved somehow in their mind the action that allows forgiveness to restore us to the recognition of who we are in reality and the experience of God being love. And therefore, so am I. So, all roads lead to Rome. The utilization of A Course in Miracles is the experience of the previous roads that we use to condemn ourselves and wander into the temptation to think the illusion of space and time is true and real in our reality, in our home. All roads lead to Rome once we get a handle on forgiveness, because every road that we go down when we utilize the mind, the action of mind that we call forgiveness, actually lead us back home. Everything is the opposite here as it is in reality. And in the action of forgiveness, we are upset, we are turned around to recognize that as we begin to think with the mind of God, all the associations in our mind that previously we thought led us astray now begin to be associated with the ability for thought to be a function of the mind of God and allow that new way of thinking, that new way of seeing, those visions to lead us home in the recognition that God is love, therefore so am I. And our reality is only love, and it is only me, it is only I who could be responsible for the experience of lack of love in misassociations and misunderstandings of what actually has been occurring to us and why it has been occurring to us. So, God is the love in which I forgive. And remember, if you are doing the exercises well, you should have no difficulty in finding a number of people you have not forgiven. And each and every time you come to a moment where you discover something that is yet to be forgiven in you, no longer associated with the guilt and fear, but allow this new association, this re-association, to be the recognition that each and every incident of forgiveness is a moment in which we can discover who we are as love, as the kingdom of heaven itself. Remember, there's a statement in the Course. Remember how many times you were given the ability to gladden yourself. Each and every moment that we discover the need for forgiveness is a moment to learn to gladden ourselves, because through the action of forgiveness we discover that our illusions were never real. Nothing ever took the place. The idea of the tiny tick of time that seemed to have been blown out into a universe of space and time never really got between you and the source of love and your ability to be that love and extend that love. It's quite natural, which is why it seems so difficult in this world, because forgiveness is unnatural in a world which is dependent on lack of forgiveness and needs the power of our mind to exist. The power of our mind identified in the opposition to love, rather than the power of our mind becoming identified with God as our source and our ability to learn the simplicity of love, which is quite natural, yet completely unnatural here in space and time, where fear and hate become the cause of our experience. So we're reversing effect and cause once again, and cleaning up the associations of our minds so that instead of all roads leading to sickness, pain, suffering, and death, all roads will lead us home to the kingdom of heaven, where in which we never left.